Humans are omnivores, right? Well, not exactly. Everybody knows that humans eat plants as well as meat, but there is a surprisingly compelling argument that we are actually carnivores. Hear me out. Based on what any animal's primary food source is, we tend to label them as either carnivores, herbivores, or omnivores. A carnivore eats mostly meat, which is the flesh of other animals. A herbivore eats almost exclusively vegetation, so plants, and omnivores consume both meat and plants. Now here's where it gets interesting. There is no clear line to distinguish between each category. For example, a black bear is an omnivore, but can also be referred to as a hypocarnivore, meaning up to 30% of what they eat is meat, usually less. Foxes are also categorized as omnivores, but to be more specific, they are mesocarnivores, which means they typically eat somewhere around 30 to 70% meat. The average urban fox has a diet consisting around 55% meat, and the average rural fox will eat closer to 95% meat. Yet we still call these omnivores. Even herbivores like cows, horses, deer, and even hippos eat some meat. They don't actively hunt, of course, but they will consume dead animals, baby birds, and insects when the opportunity arises.
He's got it in his mouth.
Wow.
He's got the bird in his mouth.
Deer like meat.
So what about us? How much meat should an average human eat? Should we refer to dietary guidelines for an answer, or take a wild guess? Or is there actually a hard science that can give us an accurate answer? Well, stable isotope ratio analysis is a vigorous scientific method that's been used to determine what anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, have always eaten. Now hold tight for the brief scientific part. Essentially, when scientists find human remains around the world, they can extract collagen from the marrow of long bones. Using mass spectrometry, they can measure the isotope ratios of elements in a sample. Isotopes are quite simply atoms of the same element that have different numbers of neutrons. So in simple terms, these tests tell us exactly what an individual's diet was, because the isotopes in the sample reflect the isotopes in the food that individual ate.
So when you eat something, the signature of that food in terms of its isotopes is retained and stays the same once it reaches your body tissues.
This testing has consistently shown that humans throughout history have thrived on a diet of around 80% animal-sourced foods versus only 20% plant-sourced foods. This is a hard scientific fact beyond dispute. The 80% was mostly from large ruminant animals, so red meat, with some other animals in there too. The 20% was mostly roots and tubers that were extremely low in carbohydrates. A hypercarnivore is any organism whose diet consists of at least 70% meat. That makes us humans hypercarnivore by definition. We didn't start our days with a bowl of cereal. We didn't base our diets around plants or fungi. We certainly didn't drink smoothies and juices or take any supplements. Human beings by nature feast and fast predominantly on red meat and other animal foods. The roots and tubers are thought to have been consumed after unsuccessful hunts. Notably, there's nothing of nutritional value in roots and tubers that isn't better found in fatty red meat. In fact, the principle is true of all plant nutrition. The bioavailability of the nutrients is relatively low when compared to fatty red meat. So eating some plants would have been more a case of survival rather than quality nourishment. It's thought we would have eaten some local seasonal and ripe nuts and berries as long as they weren't too poisonous. Since they don't grow all year round, this could only have been for something like 1 month of the year. We weren't farming and shipping products around the world back then. Eating edible berries toward the end of summertime would have allowed us to pack on a fat reserve to hopefully survive a cold winter. Remember, we came from out there, where life was harsh and edible plants were scarce. It's not like today, where local supermarkets stock produce from far-off lands all year round. That's not nature's way, it's human intervention. Now, it is important to note that the stable isotope results we've been discussing mostly refer to results from pre-agricultural people. In other words, from before the agricultural revolution around 12,000 years ago.
Fossil evidence suggests that their bones and teeth are healthier than those of agriculturalists
Often labelled as the Neolithic Revolution, this transition from hunting and gathering to farming was necessary at the time, but meant that the consumption of plants like grains, legumes, and vegetables would rise exponentially. The problem with this is that our genetic package, which is at least 300,000 years old, was unable to fully adapt to such a radical change to our food. And let's not forget that our diet changed dramatically again just over 250 years ago with the Industrial Revolution. This shift gave birth to the development of highly processed foods. Things haven't been the same since. Humans have deviated from their natural diet so much that most modern humans have forgotten what real food is. We're not supposed to eat highly processed foods or even so many plants. The fact that we have an appendix shows that we slowly ate less and less plants over time. It used to be part of a larger cecum which would have helped process fiber properly.
In a gorilla or a chimpanzee, there's very long, like 4 foot long. Ours is about that big.
Also, having a much smaller colon relative to other primates shows that our digestive tract isn't well suited for plant consumption. We just can't make use of the fiber enough. For us humans, it just ends up down the toilet. Generally speaking, herbivores have much larger cecums and colons when compared with carnivores, including us humans. These organs house trillions of microbes which produce enzymes that break down fiber. That fiber is totally indigestible for us humans, since we lack the digestive enzymes to break it down. Fiber isn't a nutrient that enters our bloodstream, and it's not essential to eat. So why is fiber recommended so often by so many health gurus? Well, when a person eats fiber, it makes its way down to the colon, where our microbes do their best job to ferment it. Not to get too scientific again, but as this partial fermentation takes place, saturated fats called short-chain fatty acids are generated as a byproduct of fiber that feeds the microbes in our gut. That's why you'll hear fiber being praised so often. Well, we can actually derive short-chain fatty acids from animal protein. In other words, fiber is totally unnecessary. In fact, fiber causes damage. I'm living proof. I lost my colon in my 20s ostensibly due to the overconsumption of fiber, but that's a story for another day. Many people don't seem to understand that herbivores that can digest fiber properly actually run on saturated fats for fuel, not carbohydrates. It's hypocritical to suggest fiber is good for us, but saturated fats aren't. It's just an illogical argument. Human beings also have a stomach similar to other carnivores. Human stomach fluid is extremely acidic, sitting between 1.4 and 2 on the pH scale. This kills off any potentially harmful pathogens in the meat, but also aids in breaking down the meat thoroughly so we can absorb all the nutrients we need in the small intestine. Here's a good example of where we sit on the pH scale. Humans are right over on the left with vultures, cats, and dogs. Herbivores are sitting closer to neutral as they don't typically consume much meat and thus don't require such acidity. It's also worth noting that we do have canine teeth and eyes facing forward like most predatory animals, although, of course, there are exceptions. No two carnivores are the same, which leads me to my next point, a physical trait that only humans possess, and that is our capacity for overhead thrown projectiles. Even other primates can't throw like we can with such power and accuracy, and this comes down to our anatomy. When compared to a chimpanzee, there are 3 key differences in our structures. Number 1, our shoulders sit much lower in position with the glenoid joint angled outward, which gives the arm more leverage. Number 2, our humerus bone, which has more of a twist in its structure, allowing the arm to rotate further behind the body, generating more energy and power when throwing. And number 3, we have a longer waist, which enables more rotation from the hips. All 3 unique traits combined allow an incredibly powerful motion that makes humans unrivaled hunters. The development of tools and our ability to throw objects to kill targets changed the game for our ancestors. Slowly but surely, humans became the apex of all apex predators. So are we really omnivores, or are we actually an omnivorous predator, specifically hypercarnivore? The whole reason we eat is to give the body what it needs to run properly. The body functions like a repair and maintenance system, but without enough of the appropriate nutrients, we won't perform optimally. For humans, it's not necessary to eat plants. Carbohydrates and polyphenols aren't vital. Quite simply, there are essential fatty acids, essential amino acids, and essential micronutrients, and all of these are found in fatty animal foods. Red meat in particular is the most nutrient dense and the most bioavailable food for humans. It's not even close. There's a reason why our ancestors didn't need to take supplements and why modern people on plant-based diets do. Plants fail to provide what animal foods supply in abundance, like vitamin B12, omega-3 fatty acids like DHA and EPA, provitamin A, and bioavailable iron and amino acids. Plants also contain anti-nutrients and chemicals which interfere with the absorption of nutrition. Fatty red meat, as well as being the most nutrient-dense and bioavailable food source for humans, contains no anti-nutrients or defense chemicals to speak of. People will often talk about the importance of balance, but we find that perfectly in ruminant animals. When you add plant foods to your meat and eggs, you lose nutrients due to the anti-nutrients and the fiber. They just get in the way. If you're someone who suffers with deficiencies, bloating or gut problems, autoimmunity or blood glucose issues, even anxiety or depression, simply cutting out plants, carbs, fungi and dairy could well solve your issues. It has for thousands of others all over the world, myself included. Other people talk about blue zones and the ample health they experience eating mostly plant-based, but that is pure propaganda. Dan Buettner, the founder of the concept of the blue zones, wanted to sell a story and did exactly that. Neuromuscular nutritionist Mary Ruddick had this to say about the so-called blue zones.
So I've been to every single one of the blue zones, and all for long periods.
So you actually know what you're talking about.
I do. And if I'm perfectly honest, the blue zones simply don't exist.
Okinawans eat lots of pork and fish, and so do the people of Ikaria. They also consume lots of other meats and other dairy products. And when they do consume vegetables, they very often cook them in animal fat. Many of the plants the so-called blue zones are shown to frequently eat have only been introduced within the last 30 to 50 years. They were never a part of their culture, much like eating rice in Okinawa, which has occurred over more recent years since unifying with Japan. Unfortunately, there is an abundance of misinformation out there about the human diet, when really it's quite simple. We don't need to weigh or track our food. We don't need to try to count calories, and we don't need to eat lots of varied, colourful food to get the nutrients we need to thrive. Just as cows eat as much grass as they want, and koala bears eat as much eucalyptus as they want, pandas eat as much bamboo as they want, humans should eat as much fatty red meat as we want. Guess what's for dinner?